Ayodele had just spoken about risk management in fintech. I'm here to speak in relation to um, governance in fintech specifically. I think before we talk about um, fintech and governance, what we need to understand is why is governance relevant in the context of fintechs? Fintechs essentially are institutions that mostly engage in financial intermediation and in some cases engage in financial transactions on their own, like deposit taking and the like, if for the MFBs that are fintech. Now, why is governance important? For you to understand why it is important in the context of Nigeria, you have to look at where the Nigerian banking sector came from. Some of you may recollect in the 1990s when we have the Fed Bank Tribunal that has to deal with various banks at that time that had various issues, most of them that arose from governance-related issues. The keynote speaker talked about 189 banks that we have in Nigeria in the 90s. And that 189 banks, a majority of them failed because in addition to risk management issues, they also have corporate governance issues. You have a bank where you have the husband, the wife, and the children who are the chairman, the MD, and the directors. So it is as a result of that led to the adoption of corporate governance code in Nigeria. The first was by the central bank, which happened post-consolidation, where the central bank had to come up with a code that codified at certain things that would apply in relation to banks and discount houses. But to understand why governance is important, the first thing we need to know has to do with the issue of conflict of interest. An essential element in governance is how to address the issue of conflict of interest among the managers of companies. Under the Companies Act, the first responsibility of a director is to ensure that the responsibilities of being a director do not conflict with his duties to the company. Now, what does that mean? A director is not permitted to have secret benefit from the activities of the company. Now, if a director knows that a particular transaction a company is going to go into is going to conflict, is going to have personal benefit from that contract, that director is required to disclose that fact to the company. And the company is to ensure that in voting on that matter and deliberation on that matter at the board meeting, that particular director does not take part in decisions on that issue. Now, where a director fails to discharge that duty effectively and have gone ahead to make secret profit in relation to a transaction, the profit made belongs to the company. It's required to be disclosed to the company. The only where a director will not be liable is where the director have disclosed the transaction to the other directors and the other director have gone ahead, taken a vote and agreed to go ahead with that transaction, notwithstanding that a particular director has interest in that transaction. Now, how does that relate to fintech? Fintech in Nigeria are essentially mostly regulated by the central bank, where you have a few that are not regulated by the central bank. Now, what have the central bank done? The central bank has come up with various regulations that have set out the governance requirements that apply to fintech. Those requirements include board composition, meetings, shareholding, who can be a shareholder, who can be directors, what are the responsibilities of directors. For instance, if as a fintech, you're in a microfinance bank or a finance company, the central bank requires you to have a majority of non-executive directors more than executive directors. And then you also ensure that you have what they call an independent non-executive directors. Then there's also a separation between the role of the chairman and the MD CEO of any of the CBN regulated entity. So unlike in the past, where you could have the chairman as being the CEO of a company, which happened in some banks in the past, that is no longer permitted. One key thing to know in relation to microfinance bank is that in relation to unit microfinance bank, because of the nature of that institution, the central bank requires that a unit microfinance bank should have only one executive director, and every other director will be non-executive directors plus one independent non-executive director. And the CBN Code of Corporate Governance that applies to microfinance bank is also similar to the codes that apply to finance companies. And there are other codes that apply generally to the other sectors that are regulated by the central bank. Another key thing to also note is that we have the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, 2018, that applies to public companies, private companies that are regulated by other institutions, and then also holding companies of other companies in Nigeria. Now, this National Code of Corporate Governance also applies to CBN-regulated institutions. But when you look through the various codes, you will see that there is a convergence between the requirement of the national code and those of the central bank. There are only little areas of conflict. But for most fintechs that are regulated by the central bank, the key requirements for them that you have to comply with the requirements of the central bank. Now, in relation to the National Code of Corporate Governance, if you are a fintech that is not regulated by the central bank, and also you do not come within the regulatory purview of the National Code of Corporate Governance, and then you take the view that, I don't have to comply with any Code of Corporate Governance requirement. There are benefits that will accrue to an institution that the governance structure is appropriate and it's robust enough to ensure that institution run effectively. I have instances where we have had to be involved in transactions between foreign institutions and companies in Nigeria, where those transactions simply could not proceed. Reason being that you have the foreign investor didn't have confidence in the fact that those companies were not strong in corporate governance ethics. So as a result, those deals most often are not fair, will fall through. And where in some cases, a deal that could take 6 months, 7 months, could take 2-3 years to complete because the investor is trying to ensure that the corporate governance requirement of this institution is restructured and ensure that it complies with what is required. For institutions that are regulated, the key requirement is that they have to comply with the requirements of the various codes before they are licensed, so they don't have major issues. Most of the fintech who are into lending that are operating with money lender license, they do not come with they are not required to comply with the codes of the central bank. And also, most of them will not come within the National Code of Corporate Governance. But it is advisable as an institution who is hopefully be looking for investors who want to ensure sustainability of that business, who wants to ensure that that system runs transparently and the risk management is risk issues are minimized. It is important for that fintech to adopt either the requirement of the central bank code as a form of self-induced obligations or comply with the requirements of the National Code of Corporate Governance. While doing that, that will ensure that that fintech institution has trust and confidence of investors, is able to have employees' loyalty, because employee will see that this company is properly run, properly governed, and will ensure that I have loyalty to the company, and if anything happens, the company will remain a going concern. It's not the case that when you have an institution and the brain behind it is no more, and that institution ceases to exist. So these are some of the key requirements for Code of Corporate Governance, and also the reason why it is essential that institutions ensure that they institute sufficient code of corporate governance in relation to their operations. It is not just to comply with requirements or regulations. It is also a way to ensure that that institution is efficiently run, efficiently managed, and that power is not concentrated in a single individual or a few individuals. And that there's a reporting line that everybody knows that if a particular person is not around, there are others who are within the system that are able to operate the system, and the system will run efficiently in a manner that addresses the interest of all the stakeholders that are involved in that particular institutions. Thank you.